Mike, you're over here.
Oh, wait,
Yep, you're over here.
Sorry.
Awesome. Well, welcome. So this session, my name is Bill Reed. I'm with the Office of the CISO at Google Cloud, and I focus on the healthcare and life sciences industry. And that covers for us kind of broadly all the sectors and on a global basis. So one of the things we're going to spend some time today talking about is the issue of resilience and building resilience in the healthcare system. And we're going to take a pretty broad cross-sectoral view of this with my panel. And I'm going to have the panel introduce themselves, and then we're going to come back and kind of work through some questions. I think we'll have some time for questions at the end as well as we're going through this discussion. So I'll start. Mike.
Great. Hi, my name is Mike Kajeski. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called MedCrypt. We are focused on helping medical device manufacturers build products that are secure by design. My background is in radiation oncology. I worked as a medical physicist in a hospital helping give cancer treatments before I worked for a medical device manufacturer called Varian, which made a big robot that shoots x-rays.
I'm Charles Fracchia. I wear a few hats. I'm the president and chairman of the Bio-ISAC, which is a nonprofit focused on the bioeconomy Information Sharing Analysis Center. I'm the CEO of a for-profit company that does a lot of reverse engineering and analysis of biological equipment, primarily threat-focused. And I also advise Department of Defense, DARPA, so the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
And good afternoon. My name is Errol Weiss. I'm Health ISAC's Chief Security Officer. As Charles said, the ISAC is an Information Sharing and Analysis Center. It's all about our facilitating the sharing of threats, vulnerabilities, and best practices amongst our members. It's primarily what we do.
Well, great. So I'm going to frame the discussion with a couple points. The first is, so Mandiant Threat Intel, Google Threat Intel now, produces a set of sectoral reports. And in Q2 2024, they produced a summary that said this, quote, Mandiant assesses with high confidence that financially motivated cybercrime represents a semi-regular and serious to catastrophic threat to healthcare organizations worldwide and will continue to do so for the near to midterm. It also looked at areas associated with intellectual property theft as well as hacktivism, but this notion of a very catastrophic risk facing the healthcare industry, and I think we will go through a number of examples of where we've seen pretty large systemic risk this year driven by financially motivated threat actors. The second kind of framing is there was some work that our CISO, Phil Venables, participated in as part of the President's Advisory Council on Science and Technology. He was charged with co-leading a group that focused on this notion of cyber-physical resilience. And what is it cross-sectorally that we need to do? And if you think about fundamentally what that's about is the ability of a system to continue to function even in a non-perfect state and deliver its core capabilities. And so that was kind of the charge to this, and they looked at a number of different strategies associated with that, and we'll kind of weave those themes in and out. But if you think about healthcare as an industry sector, as a critical industry, it is a cyber-physical business. And we're going to talk about that as we go through our kind of various sectors and views on this. But if you think about it, we go to institutions that contain a lot of things like medical devices. They have physical things like drugs and drug product that we produce and put in patients, and they are delivered inside an institution that has not only IT, but a lot of OT systems as well, in a complex interwoven fabric of service delivery for patients, right? So if the HVAC system goes down, you can't do surgeries, right? As critically as if the IT systems go down. So we're gonna kind of walk through this, and we're gonna take a perspective working our way down this panel, and I'm gonna start with you, Mike. So in the last couple years, right, it's been, there was kind of a development that happened at the FDA, so the Food and Drug Administration that regulates both drug and medical devices, but there was a particular kind of watershed event in the medical device space with the passage of an amendment to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which introduced Section 524B. which seems kind of esoteric, right? But pretty important. So can you explain what's been going on with the FDA and its importance to medical devices?
Yeah, absolutely. So as most of you know, the FDA is responsible for making sure that drugs and medical devices are both safe and effective. And between about 2008 and 2016, there were a handful of security issues in medical devices where we were not aware of exploits of vulnerabilities that harmed patients, but researchers showed that it was fairly trivial to make these devices do things they were not designed to do. And the FDA was not staffed with a bunch of security experts, as you can imagine, so that they tried to figure out, well, what is the best approach to help medical device manufacturers build products that are secure by design? And they love that phrase, secure by design. And they really started in the early 2010s by putting out guidance documents. And the guidance documents were fairly short. I think the first one was 6 pages. And it can be summarized as, hey, you should think about security when you build these devices. And then over the years, those guidance documents got longer and longer and were more detailed. But as a founder of a company that tries to sell security tools to medical device manufacturers, we would hear all of the time, this is just guidance. We don't really need to do this. The FDA would say, well, no, that's not really the correct interpretation of this. It's more than guidance. But the net impact was device manufacturers really saw these tasks as being optional. So in the budget bill that passed in December of 2022, elements of something that was previously called the Patch Act was passed by Congress. And I'm not a lawyer, but as I understand it, basically Congress gave FDA statutory authority to reject medical devices based on cybersecurity issues alone. And the FDA then put out additional guidance that was very detailed. We went from 7 pages to 47, saying when we review your medical device, we are going to look for evidence that you have designed it using a secure development lifecycle and that there are processes in place to look for vulnerabilities even after the device is released. And if we don't see proper evidence of this, we're not going to accept the devices. And what we've learned is that in the last year, in the 11 months that this has been enforced by the FDA, something like 70% of medical device submissions have received a hold letter or a request for additional information from the FDA, asking on average 17 questions about deficiencies in the cybersecurity posture of those medical devices. And many of the medical devices, the device manufacturers have decided either we are not going to be able to get this product through FDA review with the current posture, so we're going to remove our submission to the FDA. Some of the devices are just rejected. Other device manufacturers have been able to demonstrate to the FDA that their devices are safe and effective, but it's really been a tremendous paradigm shift in the last 12 months, going from device manufacturers thinking that security design is optional to seeing that they're not going to be able to sell their devices unless it's addressed.
So, Charles, we've got the FDA, but we've also seen a lot of action from the White House and a tremendous amount of interest with regard to what's called the bioeconomy. First, I'd love you to just kind of help explain what is bioeconomy. But also, what's been coming out from the White House, and what's the concern, and what's driving some of that that you've seen, and how is that starting to impact the way that bioproduction is happening?
Yeah, so great question. So the bioeconomy, there are a few different definitions. The Office of Management and Budget, I think, out of the government, has the latest one, but largely is defined as about 7 to 10% of GDP, varies based on different estimates. But it touches everything from agriculture all the way to biotech, biopharma, all the way into elements of healthcare. And not so much the delivery side, but drugs that go into patients, clinical studies, other components. And so it's a very expansive definition, but there have now been at least 4, if not 5, executive orders in the last 24 months that have touched on elements of the bioeconomy. 14081, which was the big bioeconomy EO, which had been in the works for several years, largely said we need to look at this more cohesively, and we need to support it so that we can produce more drugs more independently in a manner that is more resilient. Lots of lessons learned from COVID of not having enough doses to give to people. And then follow on activities around the security of the data, more recently with what people may not have realized actually touched biological data, but one regarding the privacy and security of Americans' data. That's 14117, I think, is the executive order. That did touch actually how genomic data, for example, is going to be looked at. That led the Department of Justice to issue a new proposed rule. I'll skip the sort of the boring administrative details, but the government is now trending towards more cohesively defending and securing data that is biological in nature, be it for vaccines that we all rely upon, or biometric data that may be carried by devices or may be generated as part of sort of a journey of care. So there's been lots of activity. I would anticipate that there's going to be a lot more coming, because it is such a growing part of the economy. And the intersection with the national security and economic security components of the government has come to light, particularly recently, as adversaries and other nations have made very clear motions in that space to potentially erode sort of that security.
So Errol, the payer and provider space, of which is a good portion of the membership of the Health ISAC, has really seen some big challenges this year, right? And I think some pretty catastrophic disruptions by threat actors. Pretty consistent with what we saw in that quote from Mandiant. And it's really kind of gone after this, kind of exposed the interdependencies in the system. What are you hearing from and observing from the ISAC as you look out at your membership, and what are they talking about? What are they concerned about with respect to this?
Yeah, I think the challenge that we have at the healthcare providers, the hospital systems across the board, is that there's just been this long history of being underfunded when it comes to cybersecurity, and I think we have to go back to like the mid 1990s and look at what was happening back then with the digitization of healthcare records, electronic healthcare records happening at the time. HIPAA regulation was becoming a thing. And the focus in the IT organizations was on compliance and privacy, protecting those medical records and not necessarily securing them. And we could probably have whole nother session, sort of the difference between compliance and security. But essentially what I'm saying is it was more of that checkbox mentality where they were making sure that they were compliant, they were living up to the spirit of the regulation, but nobody was actually looking exactly at what was exactly implemented right in the field. So nobody's really testing that. And this is where security holes were starting to crop up. And I think, again, with that history of not spending enough, we've got vulnerable systems. We've got organizations that aren't patching. We've got organizations that aren't backing up often enough. And so when they get attacked, when they get hit by ransomware, yeah, they're going down. Their IT systems are going down, and they're not able to deliver services. And when that starts happening, they're only left with one option. They can't go to a backup. They've got to pay the ransom. And so this continues to fuel that problem. That's why they're so likely to pay, because of all this situation. And the ransomware problem is huge. It is just getting worse and worse every year. So not only are they encrypting the systems and shutting them down, making them unavailable, but now they've also stolen a copy of the data, and they'll threaten to release that information unless that organization pays. But we also see the bad guys even going further and running distributed denial of service attacks against companies who aren't paying, again, to try to further extort them into paying. We also see, as of late, the ransomers are going after the patients themselves. So they've stolen thousands or more of medical records. They've got detailed patient records with very sensitive information. There was a case in Finland where 80,000 psychotherapy patient records were leaked online. You can imagine the sensitive information that was in there. One person who was disclosed actually committed suicide because of the information that was out there. And So they're going after the patients, and they're asking patients to pay as well. So they'll come to you and say, hey, I've got your medical records, pay $1,000 or I'm releasing this. So they don't care who they go after, they will continue to do that. And as Bill suggested, we've had some pretty catastrophic events and lots of ransomware across the healthcare sector as well, between things like Change Healthcare, Ascension Hospital Systems. If you saw the news this past week, Ascension just said that they think that ransomware event's going to cost them over $1 billion in recovery costs. So it continues to be a problem. And then the other example I wanted to bring up was, starting in June, we saw Russian ransomware gangs go after supply chain in healthcare. So going after blood plasma suppliers in the US, lab facilities in the UK, and then again, another blood supply operation in Florida about a month ago. And that case in the UK, for example, impacted like 900,000 patients. So there's pretty widespread impact, and I don't think it's going to get any better. Bill said short term. I think we're in it for the long haul.
Yeah. So I'm going to stay with you, Errol, for a second. I think that one of the things that we've certainly learned from the summer is kind of the complexity and appreciation, I think, for the hidden complexity of our healthcare system. And we were having an earlier conversation about the fact that I don't know many industries that have kind of the amount of complexity that exists in the services that we deliver. If you think about, how many CPT codes and how many diagnosis codes are in ICD-10, you think about the combinations of services and the billing complexities. It's a very complicated system, right? We've created. It's especially complicated, I think, in the rural health space, and I think that you've been involved in some work along with us at Google in terms of looking at what can we do in the rural health space. And if you think about it, they roughly, the various definitions put it roughly around, 2,000 plus institutions that really represent smaller hospital footprints that are in either critical access facilities or small rural facilities. What's the unique challenge there that you're seeing as we've been diving into that?
Yeah, I think on the problem with the small rural organizations, I kind of go back to what I said earlier. People will ask me what are some of the big challenges that CISOs in healthcare are facing, especially in healthcare delivery, and I'd like to say that their biggest challenge is budget. They simply don't have enough money to adequately protect their own organizations. They can't buy the technology that's needed, and then I think most importantly, they can't afford to hire and retain the talent with experience in cybersecurity to, again, properly secure those organizations. And it gets really bad again. Back to the ransomware examples. If you picture a small rural hospital that gets hit by ransomware, they can't accept new patients. What are the options? Well, people either will delay the medical care that they need, or in cases of emergency, they've got to divert to a hospital maybe hours away. So it could have some catastrophic impact on patient care as well.
Yeah. So I want to go back to you, Charles, and I think I'm curious about thinking about kind of bioproduction and lab systems and that sort of thing, that a big portion of the bioeconomy. What's unique about those? What makes those challenging from a security perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, the landscape, as Errol said, in healthcare, and particularly healthcare delivery, hospitals and facilities of that kind, is already quite challenging. But you outlined at the beginning, and medical devices, there are regulations in place, newer, that are now enabling sort of holding to account the security of those devices. Unfortunately, when it comes to making the drugs that go into our arms, our vaccines, the drugs that we all depend, the medicine cabinet is, unfortunately, there's no such security. There are existing regulations in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, particularly like specific parts, 200, 600, 610, et cetera, of that act, that talk about the quality. This is a term of art, pharmaceutical quality of the end drug is necessary to be able to be approved. We have seen in the last few years drugs actually being rejected by the FDA because their manufacturers were unable to convince the agency, the regulatory agency, that they had a sufficient control over the pharmaceutical quality of that product. We've seen deaths happen in the US due to manufacturing issues, and particularly overseas, where quality may be difficult to ascertain, where there's not enough inspectors to go and see all of those facilities. But you compound to that the fact that there's actually no enforcement of cybersecurity requirements, and it becomes a pretty horrific picture pretty quickly. You realize that the vaccines and the medicines that we all rely upon are made on a stack of IT, OT, and whole mixed systems that do not have such requirements enforced upon them. And so that's one major piece that we need to solve right away. Because what we are actually doing here, and I believe it's an analog to what's happening on the healthcare delivery side, as well said by Errol, is ultimately it's the trust in that service, in that capability that is at play here. And in the life sciences, particularly the ones that go into agricultural, livestock, health, that matters a lot for yield, for feeding people, all the way up to human medical countermeasures, vaccines in particular. The trust in those is absolutely paramount, and it is not optional. It is not optional. And yet today, we're seeing significant shortcomings in terms of enforcement of the security of those systems and those devices.
And I think that one of the things that's really interesting about bioproduction is it really is this mix of IT, OT, right?
Yes.
And so and a lot of what is happening in the manufacturing space uses similar equipment to any other manufacturing environment other than you might throw bioreactors in, et cetera. But SCADA systems, MES systems, things that are automating that process, sensors, actuators, right? There's a whole Purdue model of stuff that forms that side. And so threats to OT are something that matters to that industry, and the threat intel that is associated with that, right? And being able to understand that and get telemetry. Is that easy to come by for most of these organizations? Like, are they aware? Do they have telemetry against these?
No, the vast majority of what we've seen do not have telemetry. They're not even looking. But more importantly, and we do a lot of this in the bioeconomy ISAC focus, is that we actually take threat feeds from other environments, in particular ICS CERT, the Industrial Control Systems feed that's put out by DHS CISA. And, there were 9 this morning, I think, that were just released. 3 of those affect the bioeconomy. But in order to know which ones affect the bioeconomy, you need to know how drugs are made, which organizations have which systems. And so we actually provide an overlay on top of that saying, hey, that brand X, this vulnerability that's a 9.8 out of 10, full remote control, actually affects your mRNA vaccine production here, and you should pay attention, you should prioritize this. It's actually very hard for the CISO at that organization to know exactly what that mapping is, because it's a lot, as you pointed out, it's a blend of IT, of OT, and particularly in a sector that is plagued by many of the same underlying challenges that Errol was highlighting. Chronic underfunding in that space, lack of understanding of the IT systems. If you're a biologist, I trained as a biologist, you're not there to update, you're not necessarily as knowledgeable on how to upgrade the systems. Then there's the added whammy of you may not be able to regulatorily upgrade those systems. And so you're really stuck between a rock and a hard place, because you have been approved to make this vaccine with this exact stack. There's a vulnerability in the third element in that stack. Well, are you allowed to upgrade that? That's actually not clear.
Yeah.
So we need more guidance there from the regulatory authority, but more importantly, I think we need a community of practice coming together, which is what we focused on.
Right, and I think that you're kind of alluding to, good manufacturing and good laboratory practices, right? And things that really tie to a quality system.
Yes.
And a big portion of what that system relies on is integrity of the data, right? And so if we don't have a provable method for vouching for the integrity of the data coming off of those systems, the whole scheme breaks, right?
That's right. That's something that I've spoken about before, but it's really, really important. Ultimately, the trust. We are now in an environment that's fundamentally offensive.
Yeah.
We are seeing attacks on the healthcare delivery with billions of dollars of impacts. We actually see the same attacks on the biomanufacturing side of things. Merck, for example, notably in 2017, got hit by a side-by attack, right? Like actually a drive-by, was not the original intended victim, and yet it cost them $1.4 billion to fix. Not only that, but we actually ran short of Gardasil HPV vaccine in the U.S. Strategic National Stockpile as a result of one cyber attack.
Right.
That was not even targeted. And so it's imperative that we move quickly to fix all of the highest points of attack. Otherwise, we may not have enough drugs to actually go around.
So, Mike, what's so hard about the security of medical devices?
Good question. So I trained in medical physics, which is the science behind how radiation oncology works. And one of the first things we learned in our first class on day one is a story of this medical device called, I think it was like the Therac 25 or 27, I forget the specific details, but a very early linear accelerator used to treat cancer. And essentially the way this thing worked is a stream of electrons would be shot out of the machine. They would hit a target. The collision between the electrons and the target would generate X-rays. The X-rays were used to treat the patient. And it was a electromechanical system. The target moved in and out to change the parameters of the treatment. And as some of you may know, a software glitch, I think it was some race condition, caused the machine to say the target was in place when it was not. And the end result was a dose 100 times what was supposed to come out of the machine, coming out of the machine, hitting a patient, killing the patient. And the amount of science that goes into, and the amount of software and mechanics that go into delivering that patient, that treatment, is really on par with like sending people to the moon, right? I mean, it's a particle accelerator. It's like a tiny nuclear weapon, essentially, right? And it's really, it was surprising to me the degree to which these systems are just held together by duct tape, essentially by design. Like, I don't know if you've seen that meme where you open the server room door and there's a Raspberry Pi that says, whatever you do, do not unplug, and nobody knows what it does. That is all over the place in healthcare. And especially in the context of an academic medical center where you have researchers who are making these devices do even bigger and greater things. They're writing their own software that interfaces with it. And many of these systems are life-sustaining. So I always use this comparison that if you are trying to secure a credit card system and anything at all looks fishy about the credit card swipe, what do? You don't let the transaction go through. If you have a patient that's being ventilated on a ventilator, and the ventilator is running antivirus software that sees some questionable process, what do? Well, you probably don't stop ventilating the patient. So on top of the interconnectivity and the multiple different stacks of technology that come together, the end result of these systems is life-sustaining care, and we cannot interrupt that care, at all costs. One thing I wanted to comment about, a couple of other things that came up earlier, is this notion of hospital networks going down. I'm a little biased here. A hospital network isn't really a thing. It's this abstract collection of different systems. And I think there are so many things that we take for granted in healthcare as assuming that they're just normal. Like, hey, my hospital ER is closed today because of a ransomware attack. If there was a certain brand of car where once a month, a couple thousand of the cars just stopped working and people were stuck on the side of the road, we would not say, well, it's a shame that those people couldn't have afforded better security to secure their car. No, you'd go to the car manufacturer and be like, dude, your car is broke. Like, it's on the side of the road. What are you doing? This isn't safe. You'd fix the car.
Right.
So the notion that our hospitals, most of whom lose money and who really are not there because they're into IT, they're to deliver care, the idea that we're forcing them to spend time and money securing inherently insecure systems is just mind-boggling to me. And I feel like I'm taking crazy pills half the day that I'm going to work. Like, we need hospitals to be using systems that are inherently secure and secure by design so they can focus on treating patients and not, securing Active Directory, not to pick on Active Directory.
So you touched a little bit on a theme that Jen Easterly brought up this morning. But there is, I was sitting there thinking, well, why can't we just patch these devices? Right? Like, why can't we just patch them?
Yeah.
And I think that you kind of pointed out one of the challenges of the fact that these are life-sustaining, right?
Yep.
Or it's in the middle of a biologic process, or it's patients that are in the middle of a surgery. Like it's not so easy, right?
It really isn't.
But what else? What else makes it so hard?
So a lot of our regulations that come from the FDA are built on pills, right? They're built on the model of pharmaceuticals. I don't know a lot about manufacturing pharmaceuticals, but to your point, I imagine that once you've defined a process by which you are manufacturing the pharmaceuticals, you cannot arbitrarily say, hey, I'm going to change this thing in stack 3 and not go through some sort of review process. So in medical devices, if you upgrade from Windows Build X to Windows Build X+1, it's not entirely clear that the machine is going to behave the same way when you turn it on. And there's a real debate as to whether or not users of these systems should be able to proactively upgrade the operating system without the device manufacturer having gone through an entire quality system review. Those quality system reviews sometimes take 6 months from end to end. So it's rock on a hard place. It's, do we want to be nimble and defend against cybersecurity threats, but call into question the efficacy of the devices? Or do we want to assume that efficacy takes priority all the time and we patch when we get around to it? Neither is a perfect approach.
Yeah, and I do think there is that challenge, right? Of these are systems that were built around an intended use, and there's a quality system and a set of validation that was done to make sure that it was safe and effective. And if I start to introduce change, we have potentially some unpredictability that we throw in. And so if you think about over at a hospital, system, Errol, like how many different systems are in a system, right?
Right.
And this challenge of, and then if you look at it, most hospital systems are systems of hospitals, right? And so, we kind of have this big challenge of like, how do we do this? I think that one of the things, this is a talk that we do want to touch on this question of resilience, okay? And because so far we painted kind of a bleak picture, right? So of challenges facing this industry. I'd like to have each of you kind of give me your thought about what do we really need to think carefully about and perhaps do differently as an industry to try to improve our ability to have a level of resilience that that we'll be happy with and comfortable with. And granted, resilience of what are we willing to tolerate and what does resilience look like? We'll leave that definition, but I'd love to have you each offer, and I'll start with you, Errol.
Okay. So I think the entire planet saw how bad things can go on July 19th, right, when the faulty CrowdStrike update went out. And as we were reacting to that at Health ISAC and talking to our members about it early on in that day, things it just sounded like another ransomware attack, right? The things that they were describing. And so the hospitals that were practicing how to respond to a ransomware attack had decent processes in place. They would go to paper manual backups. They would be able to continue to provide services, albeit slower and not as efficient, but they can still at least run if they were practicing and implementing those processes okay. It was definitely challenging. And I think kind of coming out of that afterwards, I talked a lot in the beginning about compliance versus security. Now I think we also need to throw that resilience word out. We need to make sure that we're ensuring our systems are resilient to imperfect conditions, that they will continue to operate and function to provide those essential services. And I think sort of the takeaway that I would leave is use those tabletop exercises, use those drills, practice, that you can continue to function when things are not going the way you intended them to be.
Yeah, I think there are two things that are important. Resilience, first, is an onion, right? We talk about a security onion. We have to build many successive layers. It's mission critical. All the missions we've highlighted here on the stage are all mission critical. They cannot fail. And therefore, we need to have many catches, many layers to ensure the ultimate mission gets met. I don't want to actually say that it's too bleak. I mean, yes, it's not a fantastic situation to be in, but to be honest, these things have changed quite quickly. Mm-hmm. The fact that we are in a fundamentally offensive environment now in healthcare and life sciences is something that has come about fairly quickly. But that also represents an opportunity to build things secure by design is a word or sort of sentence that's been extolled a lot recently, and I think are good principles. There are technical opportunities here as well. One in particular is advances that have been made in formal methods on the technical side. I think present an enormous opportunity for our space where we need to guarantee mathematically that version A and A+1 are mathematically provable to fulfill the same function. And there have been programs largely in the Department of Defense, DARPA, so program like HACMS out of I2O in the past. There have been programs recently out of ARPA-H looking at medical device and sort of components in that space that I think point the way forward. We can borrow from election security, again, another DARPA program called SCIF, for example, that was on how do you prove the outcome of an election in a mathematical way, guaranteeing and being transparent about how this is built. There are things we can bring to bear here that are fundamental technical advances that happen here. So I think it's actually an opportunity for us to lead, to show that the mission does matter, that we can do this. It's an opportunity for tons of innovation companies like MedCrypt and others to bring that forward. I don't think this is a foregone conclusion by any means.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we do have to take an honest look at where the challenges are.
Mike?
In my opinion, and I'm a little biased working with upstream with the companies making things, but really the most important thing we need to do is admit to ourselves that there are threat actors who want to do bad things.
Yes.
I quit my job as a product manager at a medical device manufacturer with 2 young kids, and I was building a house at the time. And my wife wasn't working, and started this company to build security software for medical device manufacturers. Very first demo we ever did to a prospective customer, we started talking about how we're going to make their device more secure. And the engineer I was talking to stopped me 5 minutes into the pitch. He's like, "Hey, you seem like a nice guy. Nobody cares about cybersecurity in medical devices. You should start a different business." I'm like, "Oh my God, this is a terrible start." It's like, what did I just do? It ruined my life. That company is now an investor. So it turned around. They saw the light. But so many of our systems are designed in such a way that we just assume that who would ever hack a medical device? Like, who would want to do it? Who would hack a hospital system? And when we talk to device manufacturers today and say, "Hey, we'd love to help you make your products more secure," well, a lot of them will say, "We got FDA approval, so apparently it's already secure." But the question is, if you were required to take 10% of your balance sheet and distribute it on your medical devices in the form of a Bitcoin, would you be confident that your medical devices could withstand that amount of threat actors going after the money? I suspect the answer would be no. I think a lot of companies don't take this seriously. They view it as a checkboxing exercise. They think, who would ever really want to hack a surgical robot? But as we've seen, it's very difficult to predict the behavior of a threat actor, and it's much easier to fix these issues if we work upstream.
Yeah, and I would say that just to maybe add to that is this notion of the value of the community. Like I think that one of the things that I've noted is that the industry is now having even more conversations with each other. The value of the ISACs to be able to communicate, vendors talking with each other, supply chain really having the conversations, the sharing of threat intel at a level that really is unprecedented. So I think that if we stay in this kind of very separate, siloed way and look at individual victim analysis, I think we're losing. Or we will lose. I think that though, if we look at this and as really an industry, and we come together collectively and we look at what we can do and share and learn from each other, I think that's going to prove to be our secret weapon, and from a defensive posture. And I think that people have been picking up the defender's advantage. I think one of our defender's advantages is really how do we work with each other and really learn from each other, and bring that kind of intelligence, shared intelligence about what's really working, and bring that forward. And so with that, we have time for a couple questions if anyone has a question.
Before I ask my question, I have an opinion or a comment I wanted to make. Maybe Mike and Bill,
Yeah.
you're in the industry where you have the power to influence. Maybe you can do something about it. So one of the things firsthand that I have observed is that many of the vendors for medical devices use the opportunity to patch to make more money. They do not give patches to us, and it's usually once a year, believe it or not, and it costs heck a lot of money to make that patch happen. So many of the hospitals, to your point, rural hospitals can't afford to, let alone like put a patch, then to do a tech refresh or pay their tech debt. So this is a chronic issue that needs to be addressed in the industry. Maybe a regulation that needs to come into place where they cannot use this as a revenue mechanism, because we are playing with human life, right? And I'm pretty passionate about it. That's why I wanted to make the comment. So my question to you all is, this year, healthcare industry is in the limelight because of various reasons. Last MWise, it was all about finance. Next year, it's going to be something else. How do we keep the light on this so that we see the, to the finish, so to speak? Because I'm afraid that in 6 months, we are all going to be talking something else, and healthcare is going to be left behind the wayside.
Yeah, there's a guy whose work I really like named Josh Corman, who set up a group called I Am the Cavalry. Was saying like, hey, the cavalry is not coming to save us. We need to save ourselves. And I think, as a formerly libertarian-leaning person who really believed in the free market fixing all issues, I've really come to believe that this is an issue that's not going to fix itself. There are not properly aligned incentives between hospitals who don't have money to pay for software updates and device manufacturers who are, understandably profit-seeking entities. We need reasonable regulation and rules that come in and say, for example, if you're going to sell an MRI machine for $1 million, you need to ensure that you can provide software updates to that device for 5 years or 10 years, whatever the time period is, without charging your customers for it. I believe there's similar regulation in the automotive space that says if you're an automotive manufacturer, you need to set aside a certain amount of your revenue for anticipated warranty issues. Cybersecurity, long-term support of devices is sort of a warranty issue. And that rule isn't in place today. I don't think device manufacturers are going to do it voluntarily. So unfortunately, I think this is an area where the federal government plays a really, really large role.
Yeah. Any other? Yeah. No, and I think that we all collectively own keeping it in the spotlight.
I'll be here next year. Maybe not here.
Right.
I'm around.
But no, I think you're right. We have to, collectively solve this problem. And I hope that, we also learn from the other industries and the other industries learn from us. Again, if you look at what happens in the manufacturing space, they're using PLCs and SCADA systems that manufacturing's using. So we can share and learn from each other, and we need to.
Yeah, I think the key question there is how many botched vaccines can we afford?
Right.
The answer is not.
Right.
It's lower than 1.
One more question.
Thank you for this absolutely fascinating discussion. I appreciated the emphasis on all the things that we can do going forward, including regulatory changes and companies like MedCrypt, as well as ISAC networks. My impression is that one of the forces that holds organizations back is legacy devices, devices that are not being updated or cannot be updated. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on how organizations can handle this type of issue.
So it's this question of legacy and what do we do? Because if you look at 524B really affects products with 510Ks from October of last year, right? It doesn't go back and require that for all the legacy devices, right?
Gray area.
Gray area. So and if you look at a lot of early startups in kind of the biotech space, go and buy equipment from where?
Yeah, anywhere.
Anywhere they can get it,
their
right?
hands on.
And so whether it's patched or not patched or what have you, right? And unknown provenance in some cases. So we do have this legacy challenge in this space of, so even if we start shifting now, right, and start doing secure by design pushes from a regulatory perspective, you're right, we have this giant legacy piece. And I do think that it's going to require that we kind of step back and think again carefully about what are the kind of onion of controls and capabilities that we have to put in place and how are we going to operate resiliently. So I do think it's unfortunately going to be a lot of block and tackle kind of work that we have to do in security with these environments for some time. But it is a complicated challenge, and we don't have the money, the industry doesn't have the money to swap out that equipment for shiny brand new equipment that was properly threat modeled.
Right.
I think we need to, frankly, we need to elevate the companies that do a good job. And that's also something we don't do, right? Like, we have to recognize that the game has completely changed, fundamentally changed, and now it's about who can move faster, right?
Yeah.
And so this idea that you buy one big capital equipment and you don't tend to it and you just isolate it, that's just not reality anymore. And we need to do a better job at highlighting those who are good at being more nimble and tackling these issues, and then sharing those practices, because those are going to be common across healthcare and life sciences.
Bill, Mike, Charles, Errol, thank you guys so much for a very insightful panel. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks, guys.